Dear colleagues, friends, if I may have your attention. Thank you. I'd like to welcome you all warmly to a book launch that is a launch of the Russian translation of our work, Russian Modernization, a New Paradigm, which was published by Routledge in 2020. The publication into Russian language began over 3 years ago, but was quickly interrupted by Russia's full invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. We could, of course, have no dealings, any formal dealings with Russian institutions as a result of that, but nonetheless, we did manage to get the work translated. Finding a publisher outside of Russia proved very difficult. However, very gratefully, Elias Krohn, the editor of the journal Kulttuuri Viikko, came to our rescue, and we finally have a book published. We wish to profoundly thank Elias. We wish to thank also the Kone Foundation, Konesatio, for funding this. We wish to thank former President Tarja Halonen for writing a foreword to both editions, both language editions of the book. We wish to also thank our translators, Mikhail Mosklavsky, Elena Mosklavskaya, Yulia Prozorova, and Dmitry Kashlyov. But actually, our biggest thanks must go to Markku Kivinen for overseeing all the work of the translation, but not only that, for founding this Center of Excellence in the first instance, which was a milestone in a very distinguished career. He will be one of our speakers today. He's joined also by our director, Markku Kangaspuro, our publisher, Elias Krohn, Jussi Lassila of the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, Tuomas Forsberg and Saara Ratilainen of Tampere University, and Meri Kulmala and Marina Khmelnitskaya, both of our own institute. I wish now to share a message from President Tarja Halonen. For our international guests, President Halonen served 2 terms as President of Finland, having earlier had 3 ministerships in government, including Ministry of Justice and Foreign Affairs. Furthermore, she's the founder of the Tarja Halonen Foundation for Global Sustainable Development. President Halonen has been a very strong supporter of our scholarship here in the Aleksanteri Institute, and more broadly to the cause of Finnish scholarship generally, and we're profoundly grateful to her.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, wars are never the right means of increasing one's power. Small countries have understood it well, also because they cannot advance their goals by means of war. Peace is their most essential interest. In the period after the Second World War, Finland's relationship with Russia has been built on the principles of peace and civilization. In the post-Cold War world, we wanted to believe that even the enlightened superpowers would no longer try to undermine the sovereignty of other countries by means of war. Therefore, February 24th, 2022 was a big shock and disappointment. For Finns, it reminded us of our own wars and our struggle for independence. Finland had been non-aligned for 80 years and Sweden for more than 200 years. Today, both are members of NATO. The decades of friendly relations between the Finnish and Russian peoples and civil society have been left at the feet of the war. This book is based on the Academy of Finland's Joint Excellence Unit of Western and Russian researchers. It is an analysis of the challenges of developing Russian society. When the English version of the book appeared, the scientific world was still living in the spirit of the end of the Cold War. Nowadays, we ask new questions. What is the essence of the Ukrainian crisis? Will Russia return to dialogue with the West? Can we still find a common language with systems external to the West, with Russia, China, and the countries of the global South? Or is it humanity sliding from a Cold War to a hot war? Finland is one of the Nordic countries with well-established democratic traditions and a welfare society. However, Finnish history is in some key aspects quite different from that of the other Scandinavian countries. Finland was for over 600 years a part of Sweden. Several wars between Sweden and Russia happened during those years. Sweden was strongly defeated in the war 1808 to 1809 and had to give the eastern part of the country to Russia. Finland's experience has included being part of the Russian Empire, albeit a very autonomous part, as the Grand Duchy of Finland, from 1809 until 1917. And part of our history of independence has included warfare. We fought twice against the USSR during the Second World War. Finland came out of the war without Soviet occupation and remained an independent democratic society with a market economy. In that sense, our history also separated us in a fundamental way from our Baltic and Eastern European neighbors. Finland had never been a part of the Soviet Union, nor member of the Warsaw Pact or Comecon. The post-war world and the polarizing structure of the Cold War was a lonely environment. Yet Finland managed to rebuild after the war. Hosting the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe in the 1970s was an important moment for Finland, as the country presented itself as an ideal site for deterrent and East-West diplomacy. After Cold War, we have had natural mutual interest with Russia in trade and in environmental issues, as well as in many forms of everyday interaction. But we have now again learned that history has not ended and that the world is wrong. We face the war in Europe and the global risk of a new Cold War. Russia's relations to the West have become highly problematic, and Russia is increasingly turning to the East, prioritizing China as a partner. We are almost witnessing the end of the old school of diplomacy, an institution that was based on immutable laws and rules that were observed even at the height of the Cold War. This new environment of high risks requires a new analysis of Russia. We have invested increasingly in this field from the mid-1990s, when many other countries were downsizing the institutions of Russian studies, believing in the end of the history. We never believed that Russia would be like any other society. More and more Finnish scholars have examined Russian history, politics, and culture. We have also aimed at informed decision-making, creating networks of stakeholders in addition to academic expertise. The knowledge generated has been eagerly consumed by Finnish politicians and by opinion makers. Nowhere has this scholarly tradition been more productive than in Helsinki University's Aleksanteri Institute, the Finnish Center for Russian and Eastern European Studies. Over 2 decades, it has grown from a small initiative with only a handful of scholars into an internationally prestigious institute overseeing nationwide educational programs, producing renowned experts and informing both policymakers and international public opinion. As a recognition of the Institute's huge contribution, the Finnish Academy awarded it with the 6-year Center of Excellence in Russian Studies. This center has been extraordinarily productive. Its experts have published over 40 books and multiple other publications and have been ever present in the media and other public and academic forums. Part of the culmination of the Center of Excellence is the present volume. The book, with contributions by many very distinguished scholars, is an ambitious attempt to move to the very forefront to contemporary Russian studies. Since Russia is a country undergoing constant surprises, high risks and profound transformations, scholarship needs to be alert and observant to understand and to chart these huge changes. As a German scholar, Christine Engel writes in the review of the English version, this book shows the key contradictions of Russian society. In that spirit, I strongly recommend this book also to Russian readership, to anyone, experts and laymen alike, who wants to gain real insight into the complexities and contradictions of Russian societal development. Although protracted war makes the world look like black and white, the history has not ended now either. Vast ecological challenges such as climate change and new security threats such as terrorism, global inequality and poverty cannot be solved on the basis of competitive national interests. In a highly interdependent world, we have to find joint new solutions that are able to combine economic growth, environmental sustainability, and social justice. In this way, I do my own work in the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We need diplomacy and recognition of joint global interest and human values. Russia has to make its own solutions, but in the long run, they have to acknowledge that global problems will touch Russia too. Only then we will have a future.
Well, again, we thank President Halonen for her words, and I would like first to call our publisher, Elias Krohn, to the floor. He will have a few words for us.
Okay. Dear listeners, during the last couple of years, Finnish people have talked about Russia more than in a long time. For example, last year there was the President Vladimir Putin on the cover of an afternoon newspaper on 333 days. Russia's war in Ukraine worries Finns, what is easy to understand, and this is strongly reflected in the media. Also, social scientists are often interviewed, but however, the daily news stream often lacks in-depth and background perspectives. We have heard speeches like that after February 24th, 2022, the world is not the same than earlier. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a shocking event. It has created a new Cold War-like situation in Europe and has taken Russia's internal development in an even more authoritarian direction. However, it's important to look at the development in the longer term as well. Historians and other scholars understand that development is rarely determined only by the individual whims of leaders, but that there are longer-term processes in the background that are important to understand and analyze. The problems and questions in the modernizations of Russia have a lot to do with all of this. Research related to Russia is now more important than perhaps ever before. It is unfortunate that in the same time it's now also perhaps more difficult than ever before because many cooperation relationships have been broken, and traveling to Russia is difficult, or it causes negative publicity. Right now, in-depth information about Russia's development is desperately needed. I am happy that we have been able to publish in Russian the final report of the Russian Research Center of Excellent Unit of the Academy of Finland, the book Russian Modernization, a New Paradigm, Российская, модернизация, новая, парадигма. Although it was written apart from the new prefaces before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it still sheds very interesting light on the structures and trends that have made Russia what it is today. Our Kulttuurivihkot company publishes Kulttuurivihkot magazine and also poetry and other fiction, but we have also kept the doors open to social non-fiction books, of which we have published already a few. The goal is to promote a deeper understanding of the world and knowledge-based politics. If this book is not a step in that direction, what is? That's why we immediately took Markku Kivinen's suggestion that Kulttuurivihkot take over the Russian edition of the Russian Modernization book for publishing in cooperation with Aleksanteri Institute. This report is a significant research overview of contemporary Russian society, and it's important that Russian people and Russian speakers in Russia, in Finland, in Europe, and in other parts of the world can also read it. I believe that it will provide important materials for understanding the current situation in Russia, and in the best case also help for the development of social and political activities for a better and more peaceful Russia and the world. Thank you. And after this session, you have a possibility to buy this book from me. The special price only here today is only 20 euros.
Kiitos paljon, Elias. Thank you very much. I'd now like to call to the podium Markku Kivinen.
So, dear colleagues, I'm delighted to be here today with several of my colleagues who have participated in this big effort. It took more than 10 years. The funding of the Finnish Academy was 6 years, and the faculty funded 8 more years, and then we still continued publishing in this spirit. We organized 7 Aleksanteri conferences in the context of the Center of Excellence. When we started, we had this modernization topic very much on the agenda in international terms as well. All European countries, except on Estonia, had made agreements with Russia concerning the modernization of Russia, that they would help Russia to modernize. Dmitry Medvedev had launched his idea that Russia needs modernization, and Putin had several speeches on that, even before that and after that and so forth. And now of course, all this cooperation is gone, and we are in a completely new kind of a situation, as Tarja Halonen was describing in her talk. All the intellectual cooperation has been stopped. Institutional cooperation has been stopped. Still, we have the question how Russia is going to develop, how we are going forward here. What is the relevance of our book at this situation? What the war has really changed? And that's what we are going to discuss today. We are going to discuss the issues, how the war has really changed this situation. Where do we stand in intellectual terms? What are our next challenges? What are the big issues that we are facing in contemporary world? We are completely unique, in a completely unique situation in terms of Russian studies. When we started, there was discussion about the topic whether it's relevant to study abroad the issue of Russian modernization. And there were two kinds of criticism against us. One of them was that we are following the course of the Russian government, because they spoke about the modernization as well. Another one was that we were following the reasoning of general Western modernization theory, which doesn't fit to Russia. These are relevant points, but they were highly misleading in terms of the effort that we made. In fact, we managed to show how limited scope the Russian modernization efforts have been during the last 2 decades. We managed to show that the Russian elite is concentrating on technological and economical catching up of the West, without any understanding of any other processes in the society. This catching up has not been complete failure, and even the diversification has been, to some extent, progressing. There's lots of evidence in our book about that in the first chapter about economic development. However, this broader idea that the institutional modernization needs something more fundamental is completely lacking. As far as the Western social sciences is concerned, the idea of general modernization, which was very present in the talk of the end of history in the beginning of the 1990s, turned out to be completely misleading. And this misleading was due to the fact that there was very little empirical substance. There was very little understanding of contemporary Russia and Russia as it was in the 1990s. Ever since the Harvard guys went to Russia in the beginning of the 1990s, there was an evident lack of proper empirical analysis of Russian problems. And the second issue, which was an issue there in these understandings, was that there are contradictions and conflicts within Russia, that there are something which went wrong. And this is what our book shows. It shows where Russia stands in terms of its basic tensions. 10 tensions which will be there even if Putin would die tomorrow, and even after 10 years. They are so fundamental, empirically observable antinomies that Russia really has to try to solve in the long run. But they are not solvable by any kind of philosophical positions or by any kind of individual act, even if there were democracy tomorrow. All of the antinomies would be there. And this is the significance of the social science. It shows the real challenges that the societies face, that it's not only about catching up It's understanding what society is all about and how people live in those societies. And this is the key issue in our book. We can show how they live at the moment and what are the tensions that the politics has to be managed. Most of all, dealing with these antinomies is managing. It's not something like solving. They are not something that can be solved by one simple political decision to be democratic. They are much more complicated. And when I heard the voices of Russian opposition, I don't hear much of talk of these antinomies. I hear lots of populist talk about Putin and Russia without Putin, but not much talk about Russian real problems and the solutions that Russia has to make. And I hope that our book, it doesn't help so much in terms of the political resistance. I hope that it will. But it's not something immediate. It is something that people have to work with. It means that you have to read the book. You have to argue about the book. You have to challenge the book. But you cannot neglect the book. That's the most important message which I have today. Read the book. Start discussing about these issues. If you don't do that, you don't have any instruments to govern Russia in the future. You don't have any real instruments for the resistance of Russia. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Markku, for a very impassioned defense of scholarship. I'd now like to call our director, Markku Kangaspuro, to the floor. Markku.
So it's nice to be here. And finally, we have really published this book, and I can confess that I have read it. I thought that I say a couple of words about my article, which concerned the question of the strong state and the Russian state identity building process. And it's a question of of course, the question of it's related to the question of the modernization, because I see it, Markku asked it, that what has changed when the war broke out and Russia attacked Ukraine. I see that the process to build up this statist identity, collective identity around the Russian state, following the principle that when you are speaking about state-citizen relations, the principle is that the state doesn't serve citizens, but citizens have to serve Russian state. And that feature, which is really, it's one probably of these antinomies as well, because the idea of this collectivist identity of Russian nation and state identity is that the citizens are bound to the state, serve the state, and they are for the state, and that means that the state should be able to mobilize them somehow. And what we are seeing is that the task is task of impossible. We see more alienation. People are not attending, and they are, of course, for good reason, they are not attending to the political life. They are prevented to take part of the societal development and decision-making. Part of people, active people, have been emigrated and so forth, and so forth. And this alienation from the state is the same parallel process of the state-building identity process. And I don't know how Russia is going and is even able to solve that problem. One way try to do it is that there is going on or has been going on already a long time, many years, the process to create and develop a new history culture. I don't mean academic history writing. Russian, professional historians, they are they are doing still good work, most of them. And it's not that question, but this what is history culture is what we see in the society, around the society and around Russia. There are new statues for heroes and persons which don't deserve it. There are published fictional books. They are launching new movies which are reinterpreting Russian history in supporting this new old idea of the state identity of Russia and to putting people on the place. That kind of diversification or separation of the citizens and the state and state institutions looks to go backwards at the moment if we are speaking about this identity building. But the contradictory process is at the same time when people are alienating from the society and the state, that means that there is a so-called, I would say, the hyper-individuality as well. People don't want to, they want to, to be a part of smaller and smaller units or communities, more individual. Some social scientists have described it as an atomization of the society, and it helps also those who are ruling Russia at the moment. And as I mentioned, we can see the difficulties of the Putin's regime to mobilize people to give a consent, show the consent of the current rule. If you can't mobilize people to take part of the election and then people, which is the minimum level to show the support. And if people see after elections that they are frauded, they are seated, the figures are not right, this only create this circle of alienation as well. And what will be the end result, I don't know. It's difficult to say and to make any kind of prognosis, but I see that there is, from my point of view, that there is going that kind of two direction of process which has been speeded up only after the break of war. That kind of collectivist, building up collectivist state identity and alienation of the people, and they are not, encountering. They are not on the same planet, and that makes somehow antagonistic situation, which can be one part of the vulnerability of the Russian society and political system. So that is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Markku. If I can now call Tuomas Forsberg to the floor.
Thank you, Brendan, and thanks to all who have contributed to this book and this translation that is now here. So I was responsible for the foreign policy cluster of the Center of Excellence and also for the chapter on Russia's foreign policy and its modernization, together with Hanna Smith, Katri Pynnöniemi, Sirkka Mäkinen, Niina Tynkkynen, and Veli-Pekka Tynkkynen. I think, as Markku said, the question of modernization and Russia was a very tricky one when we started, and it completely almost changed the discourse during the 10 years. In foreign policy, I think that when we wrote the chapter, the idea was to say that how Russian foreign policy has modernized. It hasn't modernized when it comes to the goals, but has modernized when it comes to the means. So it has adopted certain trade policy, energy policy means, soft power elements into foreign policy, but the goals were still pretty pre-modern, if you like, very traditional power, and then even, as we later were able to see, even territorial goals. If we would write the chapter now, after February 22, I guess something that would be different would be to say that not only were the goals traditional, and it is also that perhaps the war shows that there's been a tendency that the means have become part of the goals. So the very rational paradigm of war, where war is simply a means to an end, has been blurred into a way where war has become part of Russia's state of existence, a goal in itself, to put it bluntly. But so that would have perhaps been a paragraph or chapter, how to frame a chapter had it been written after 22. Thank you. And I apologize, I have to run quite soon. My son is going to his grandparents' place, and I promised to go to the railway station to see that he catches the right train.
Thank you, Tuomas. I believe our next speaker is Marina, if you'd like to. Up there you are.
Thanks a lot. Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the editors of the book and Markku on this monumental work and on the completion of this Russian edition, which I think will allow a much greater number of people and broaden the audience of this wonderful work. I've been very lucky, I was very lucky to be part of two clusters of the Center of Excellence, one on politics and one on social policy. So my contributions are in the chapter on Russian politics with my concept of hollow paradigm, and the chapter on social policy where I wrote about housing policy. With my contribution to the politics chapter, where I looked at the work of experts and how they work with the Russian state, with the Russian authoritarian state, towards those ends, which would modernize the country. And as the previous speaker said, that technical modernization and introducing those international practices to the country. So in that work, I put together the literature on comparative authoritarianism and public policy and joined it with Russian politics, arguing that the Russian state has moved over the past 20 years, has moved from pushing aside and alienating certain parts of the epistemic community, expert community, towards bringing more and more experts in an effort, in a neoliberal participatory effort to make policy perhaps more responsive to the societal needs, but at the same time disabling the political action of these actors. So, and that's what Markku talks about when he speaks about the dichotomy in the development of Russian society and the Russian political system, when it both enables and disables certain kind of action. And then in the, and therefore my title for the section is Building a Hollow Paradigm. And in the second, which is actually the third chapter of the book on social policy, I suppose I was reflecting just now very quickly on the words of President Halonen, and I thought perhaps nowhere else you feel so clearly, as she said, that history hasn't ended and the world is round. because so many important and profound and deep reforms have been undertaken in the social policy sphere, and so many people were involved, and the scholars in this chapter have written so eloquently about educational reforms, reforms of social care and child care, housing, which was my case, and about health care. In my own contribution, and I think in the contribution of other scholars in this chapter, I think we speak about the neoliberalism, which has nevertheless been introduced in policy, in the everyday life of Russian society, and new policy approaches, new instruments. All that work has been done, and it's there, and it remains there in Russia today. And I don't think the neoliberalism, for instance, in the housing sphere has been in any way reversed. I know you might ask, is it really so? But for instance, take the issue of home ownership. Russia still, even today, when it gives out large sums of money for people going to fight against Ukraine to buy homes, this money is still for home ownership. It's not giving out housing, it's not giving out rental housing to people. So this new liberal paradigm is certainly strongly rooted there, and I think all those reforms will not go for, not even unnoticed. They are everywhere. They will not go into the ground. They will not disappear. And when Russia chooses to return to the world, they will be there, and they will bring Russia closer to international practices and hopefully to a better future one day. So I will stop there, and would like to thank everybody who was in that project, and Markku personally, and Markku Kangaspuro and Brendan for having me as part of that project. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marina. Now, again, ignoring the list, I would like to call Jussi Lassila to the floor from the Finnish Institute of Foreign Affairs.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Markku, for invitation. It's an honor. The time when I was in Aleksanteri Institute and working in the university, I think this Center of Excellence and the work with the project was very essential, and the kind of formative for my current work has been 7 years in more policy-oriented in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, but still keep going on with Russia's domestic developments. And I contributed here in two clusters, or be part of the two clusters. One was in politics, and one other was a culture, or more related on maybe this sort of an identities. And of course, as here has been previously noted, of course, the current situation makes that what is the role of these contributions? Is there anything which could be seen as a relevance anymore in the current situation? I think, well, retrospectively, I think those kind of antinomies and forms of regarding for example, the empirical cases of how the role of the opposition and different political trends and forms of political struggle and competition that occurred still prior to the 22 invasion certainly demonstrated that there is a kind of tightening the screws, and the situation becomes more and more complex for political modernization in normative terms. I'm talking about here as a political democratization, more political freedoms, and in general the trends which could challenge this Russia's authoritarian development. However, we could say that 22 was a kind of the kind of victory for the regime, or solution for this kind of, that there is no more such a process or attempts to coping with developments and trends that challenged the regime, because this was, I think, the trademark for the Putin's policies prior to that there were different attempts to definitely suppress the opposition and kind of independent developments and trends in society, but maybe not entirely crush them. And now we are in the situation where we see the kind of total suppression. So what could be said now regarding the book as a whole, and I would say that even in the case of the most darkest dystopia, let us say after 10 years, if Russia has changed the kind of North Korea, and we read that book, we could say that these kind of processes were taking place. There were processes which could be described regarding the theories of modernization. And the very concept of modernization is certainly a thing of the yesterday or tomorrow, but there is a long historical process. And actually this pinpoints that even in this darkest case, we could say that they are more or less frozen. They are still there, and there must be some kind of potential. Of course, it doesn't guarantee anything that how it would emerge. But maybe 2 points could be done if again something which regarding the Russia's further developments, and I tend to try to be in an optimistic, not in a more crowdless way, or simply envisioning something which is completely out of the touch, but what the current situation might have opened regarding Russia's further developments and this kind of modernization, which is not the issue of a matter of choice or issue of liking. It's a process you cannot avoid. And in this sense, it's a kind of pending and permanent challenge for any authoritarian regime, how to cope with, how to handle with processes which not tend to be aligned with the system. So I think regarding the history of the current war, that if Russia faces a defeat one way or another, which it's a kind of a matter of debate that maybe this defeat has already happened because it didn't went as Putin planned, yet it's still a pending and open question. But as history demonstrates, the unsuccessful wars for authoritarian regimes are those turning points, and there is maybe a certain opportunity or chance for that, for example, this imperialist identity and imperialist paradigm, which has been quite strong in the Russian history. Maybe it's closing to the moment where in the future political leaders will see that there are no prospects of pushing that forward. It's not going to disappear, but its position becomes a more normal in Russian politics. And the second, maybe this is more empirically grounded. I would say that there are certain benefits of these underdevelopment features or antinomies in Russian society regarding the lack of political organization or collective action problem and many other challenges, which are not only the result of this enormous repression, but this is a pending and constant problem for the Russian civil society of years to come. But in the current situation, this is also a problem for the regime, because we do see that there's a serious or more or less serious plans to build some sort of a new ideological kind of regime. And we don't see such a readiness or interest in society for that. There is still this major indifference, atomization, as Markku Kangaspuro referred, and these will certainly, in a longer term, will make a big problem for Russia. So in that sense, the idea of in the case of if they're trying to build some kind of semi-fascist or even fascist type of society, the society is still indifferent. They are not so happy with any kind of ideas. They are maybe not happy with the Western policies as well. But this kind of atomization and indifference and kind of retreat from all societal and political activities, it might be a good positive thing in the current situation. So I maybe stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jussi. Moving on to our next speaker from Tampere, Saara Ratilainen, who was also... No, oh, sorry, Meri, I got that wrong again. So, Meri Kulmala, Helsinki University. Thank you.
So, good afternoon to everyone. As the others, I'm one of the authors in the book, and I'm very grateful to be here today. Thanks for Markku Kivinen for inviting me. So my background is in sociology, and unlike Brendan said in the beginning that I would be based at the Aleksanteri Institute, I come from the Faculty of Social Sciences, but I used to work at the Aleksanteri Institute when the Center of Excellence existed, and back then my work contributed to the so-called welfare cluster of the center that Markku Kivinen was leading, and the kind of on the work on which the social policy section in the book builds on. And as said, against this background, I've been involved with Markku and many others here in writing the social policy section of the book, which covers a wide range of issues from rising social inequalities to different fields of social policy and state-society relations more generally. And today I'd like to address a few points concerning the importance of critical empirical social research in any context, and some consequences of the current situation that the current situation, from my viewpoint, unfortunately has. So much of the research that we cover in our section in the book builds on empirical findings that were enabled through extensive fieldwork in Russia. And for conducting such fieldwork, collaborative, sometimes even participatory research practice has been very central element, and I truly believe that such an approach has been crucial to provide us an opportunity to inform the wider macro level developments and related analysis with more kind of micro and grassroots lens, which in turn, in my opinion, has been also instrumental to establish a kind of a more nuanced and complicated understanding of the Russian society, and especially those welfare-related issues that we were studying under the cluster. And I think that this kind of approach has enabled us to observe many of those contradictions that Markku was referring in the beginning in Russian social policy, but also in other fields of life, as the book argues. And just to give examples that such an approach, I think, allowed us to identify, for instance, the effect of many of those social policies at the level of ordinary people, or how people and different stakeholders navigated within the very restricted circumstances, what kinds of resistance or adaptation strategies they engage with under the ever-tightening grip of the authoritarian regime. We also witnessed how several global social policies traveled to Russia and how they were domesticated in the given context. So even if in the bigger picture social policies have much served kind of a nationalist or patriotic interest of the power structures instead of citizen concerned, among sometimes kind of repressive implementation, we also witnessed some space for maneuvers and influence, if rightfully framed. And I think that such critical empirical social research that builds on appreciation of multiple perspectives and different ways of knowing would have not been possible, of course, without those friendly relationships or collaboration that many people have been referring here also. So they wouldn't have been possible without our colleagues in the Russian academia or civil society, or even in the local governments and such. And I think that it's been crucial for us accessing the field, but also to our interpretations, that doing research together. And I think that it's needless to say, as said many times, that now the situation looks quite different, and kind of, if not impossible, at least it would be difficult to engage in such critical empirical social research that we did not only for us outsiders but also people in Russia who studied the issues with us, who I think that would be labeled as quite unwanted topics at the moment. So there are those, as referred already, many kinds of official restrictions, but also the fear to be engaged in such research by us, the fear of causing some risks or harm to our collaborators. So at the moment, for such research that I think that I was personally conducting, fieldwork is not quite possible anymore, or the other kind of alternatives that we could kind of do research together. And I think that this impossibility comes with several consequences. First, it has consequences on the knowledge itself, as I think that we can know only partially, and that is kind of verifying, as I think that we suffer from the lack of knowledge, which would be very much needed, as our former president highlighted as well. But it's also verifying for the sake of the advancement of critical social scholarship in the Russian case, and also for those social policy reform that started to take place, as Marina also referred. So, and both of those kind of a critical scholarship and the reforms, as we have witnessed, developed much in the international dialogue. So I do think that the situation is quite different now and difficult, but I still think that there are those alternative voices still there, and as they have had some role, of course not necessarily enough role, that they are there and they could play a role also in the future if we saw a change. But having said that, my view on any bottom-up changes remains quite pessimistic, as I think that the space for critical voices in all essential fields, would it be academia, civil society, media, seems to be quite close, and I don't see kind of a critical mass enough, the potential for which I think that would possibly had been around the 2011 protests. So it's not there. So kind of sorry to end with this kind of pessimism, but I think that it's good to give the floor to Saara also, who kind of perhaps shares a bit different view about the possibility of doing kind of such empirical research at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Meri. It was very elegant and insightful pessimism. And finally, Saara.
Thank you, Meri. And first of all, thank you. I'd like to thank Markku for inviting me to be part of this book launch roundtable, and congratulate once more Markku and, of course, the whole team of contributors on the new chapter in the life of the final book of the Center of Excellence, the new Russian edition of the book. And actually, rather than repeating maybe what I have written in my contribution is titled Women's Role, Feminism and Russian Neoconservative Gender Politics. So I was basically taking part in this Markku's overall discussion on modernization from the point of view of feminist movement and the persisting tactics that the feminist movement were able to maintain throughout the years of growing repression and centralization and diminishing freedom of speech and all kinds of these negative tendencies that were part of the increasing authoritarianism in Russia. But still, feminist movement was one of those cases that through which it was possible to show that there's some grassroots resistance that is very easily adopts well to the changing political context through developing media technologies, with the help of media technologies and new tactics in grassroots activism. But there's a lot of research and good sources that you can find and read if you want to know about these developments in more detail. And I wanted to go directly to what Meri ended her address, saying that actually this, I wanted to talk about my contribution as an example of how this small entry in the book actually inspired a new research project and worked personally for me as a way to develop new ideas. And actually then I developed a new research project on Russian feminism and media. I wanted to kind of investigate in more detail about the role of media and new media technologies and global discourses and this engagement by Russian media, more like mainstream and lifestyle media, and audiences in all kinds of global forms of feminist online activism and campaigning and all kinds of those developments. So I developed a new project idea and applied, and I got funding from the Academy of Finland, and the project started in 2021. So it took a few more years between this contribution and the start of the project to develop these ideas. And then the idea was to take the projects to the regions to investigate reception. Part of the project was to investigate, or the idea was to investigate how actual Russian grassroots citizens perceive these globalized, popularized feminist discourses and what kind of potential that might have in Russia for the democratization processes potentially, or the processes of how people perceive different ideas, not maybe in a political context, but in these everyday life contexts, or in lifestyle contexts, or when they engage with popular culture and global media. But of course, that was not possible. Soon it turned out the full-scale invasion started when our project had been active in 6 months only. So we had to really radically change the research design. But at the same time, we could see that feminism was actually became one of the most visible oppositional movements and anti-war resistance movements, because the second day of the war, a small group of feminist activists started a new movement, feminist anti-war resistance, which rapidly grew into quite a big and visible movement, and one of the kind of the main anti-war groups and networks within Russia, but also outside Russia. And they were using media very efficiently, drawing from the pre-war creative tactics and creative ways of adopting to the changing political context and adopting to, and also using new media technologies to mobilize, to recruit activists, and to attack or target different spheres of society with these micro-scale actions and activism. So in that sense, feminism became, we can say, relevant in a very new way after the full-scale invasion. It is one of the kind of the most optimistic examples of opposition by also regular citizens, because we have now collected interview data with feminist anti-war resistance activists, and we see there are a lot of activists still within Russia. And there are a lot of, the network consists of people of younger generations who were not politically active before the war, who were not engaged in feminist activism, but were familiar with these global discourses of progressive gender roles and online activism, Me Too campaign and other hashtag feminist campaigns. So they're familiar with this language of feminism and kind of progressive ideas of gender roles. Also kind of being in opposition with the state conservative gender ideology. So they were easily mobilized. So it was easy to mobilize these younger generation Russian citizens into activism. And now, although the movement is finding it difficult to of course, to organize protest within Russia, the most visible protest is happening outside Russia by those activists who have emigrated, or those international activists who are doing protests in solidarity with Russian feminists. But also within Russia there are networks between feminist anti-war resistance activists, and now at this moment the ways they are feeling that they are taking part in this activist process, that they're creating networks like hidden underground networks with the help of online communication technologies. They're learning to organize. They're learning they're learning learning collective decision making, collective kind of organizing, and thinking about the future of Russia. What can be done after the war, probably, or the political regime has changed. So now there's this active phase of preparing for the future, activating politically, mobilizing those people who are eager to kind of now take part and who kind of politicized their thinking and their ways of thinking and seeing the world after the full-scale invasion started. So these are some of the tentative results already of the project, and will be kind of finding their final form in the publications that we are now in process of writing and publishing. And this is just a small part of the project, but just wanted to kind of, in response to Meri's address here, that we were kind of also, for many pragmatic reasons, forced to kind of adopt to this current situation, find new ways of kind of redesigning our research focus, or like refocus our research project almost entirely, and find ways to collect data within these circumstances, go through some really serious ethical assessment of how to even do research in this. And there are other projects who are doing the same currently. And these ideas are developing from the research that was conducted during, the time period of the Center of Excellence. So there's like a really important background for the current research now that we're conducting on Russia and Russian society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saara. I heard a slither of hope in some of your comments, which was nice. Hope, as was once said, is a good breakfast but a poor supper. But we're not that late in the day, hopefully, yet. And now, finally, I would just like to give the floor very briefly to Elena Kahl. Yes. And then we'll open for questions and comments. We've limited time now, so Elena.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your patience. You noticed when Markku Kivinen introduced the book, he was quite furious. Did you notice?
How could we not?
Well, the thing is that actually he succeeded in creating a scholarly community. Initially, he said that he wants to establish a Finnish school in Russian studies. Well, look guys, we have it here. In this room, in the Aleksanteri conference network and the outreach to Russian colleagues who have it more difficult than ever. I invite you all to believe that this is one step and everything is not over yet. You remember actually, thanks to Benjamin Nathans, who sits here in the audience, he asked me where is the building where the Helsinki Security Conference in '75 was held. Well, in '75, who did know that it had such long-standing effect? We have to believe in our capacities. We have a strong activist, Agnes Haikara, sitting here. Please take this book with you. And please, colleagues, tell that manuscripts first, they don't burn. We have it does not have to be, we have the Helsinki spirit. Maybe we have this Aleksanteri conference spirit, where maybe the Russian modernization paradigm has already happened. We just have to keep the torch, as is in our poster. Congratulations to Kulttuurivihkot, to Elias Krohn, and to everybody. One more word about the, nobody asked, what is this picture? It is the cover picture of the book. Our friend, contemporary artist Irina Satulovskaya saw when an old tree, birch, after the storm came down, to a storm, sorry. And she somehow understood that this is a perfect picture for the Russian modernization book. Thank you.
We're now actually quite limited in terms of time for Q&A, but we would certainly welcome questions and comments from the floor. I would ask again, decide if it's a question or a comment first, perhaps, and do try and keep them short. I think this cannot be said enough. Okay, sir. And we have microphones we can get to you.
I have the shortest question on record. The name of the new paradigm in Russia is Ruski Mir, the Russian world. What is the name of the new paradigm in this volume?
Markku, that's really for you.
I think it is the paradigm of Russian antinomies, the key antinomies of contemporary Russia. But the basic idea is to understand that these antinomies are not, there's lots of discussion in philosophy, you know, the antinomy concept of course comes from Kant, and in Russian philosophy there is a lot of discussion about the philosophical antinomies by many viewpoints and so forth, but this is not a philosophical concept. It is a social science concept indicating the results of the empirical research. And in those terms, it is something which we try to present as a unique step in terms of the social science understanding of what contradictions in modern societies are all about. That they are all about these kinds of macro-level tensions that exist in societies. And these are different in different societies, even if we have the similar kind of problems. I mean, the big issues, let's say that we have this hydrocarbon world, which we are trying to get rid of. But it's completely different political problematic in Russia, which is depending on hydrocarbons, on its economic structure, than, for example, in Finland, which is completely buying all the hydrocarbons elsewhere and trying to mobilize extensively the renewables. So for Russia, this kind of a big issue is not some kind of a principal decision that we are getting rid of hydrocarbons. And they have renewables a lot. But their own life, the whole economic success and the resources depend on the hydrocarbons. So it will be a long and complicated process. And if the opposition doesn't take these kinds of things seriously and have serious arguments about these issues in the very core of their argumentation, then something very fundamental is lost. And this is the idea, that there are global challenges, big issues which we all have to face, but then the political problematic, if we make the distinction between the politics and policy, our book tells more about policy, about what you do when you are in power. It doesn't tell much how you get into the power. That may need things which we have been discussing within this conference, like finding coalitions with very different backgrounds, on the other hand, or coming back to the grassroots things people facing in their everyday life, the pollution problems or whatsoever. But it also needs this kind of intellectual understanding. What can we do? How we progress in these issues? Understanding that they are long-term processes, but the direction is important. The direction is important. The direction towards democracy, the direction towards rule of law, the direction towards elimination of the role of the Siloviki and these kinds of things. These are not philosophical discussions. These are heavy political discussions which are specific to each country. And to understand these, you need social science analysis, and it must be empirically based.
I mean, if I may, actually, just to fill in that, again and again, it came up during the various contributions. The question arises of, opposition in Russia. Can somebody give us some sliver of hope, or to what degree? I mean, we all remember the day of Navalny's death, and it was a very dark day indeed. It seemed like hope died that day. It looks pretty bleak from the outside, but with your expertise of internal Russian politics, maybe you could maybe take this. If I'm not putting you on the spot. Tuomas ran, so he couldn't take this one.
Okay, well, yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that when Navalny died, if you're going back to that, I think there was still the idea that this kind of moral authority he had could transform to for example, his widow and this, but this was a bit idealistic expectation, need to admit. And unfortunately, we do see that the Navalny truly was a moral authority, even his position as a prisoner. And now when he's gone, we are back in that situation, which is unfortunately quite common for the Russian opposition. There's a kind of double challenge. The previous challenge was that there were always all kinds of crazy disagreements and this lack of coordination, this classical coordination problem, collective action problem, which is not a Russian problem. I think it's a result of weak institutions and kind of personalist politics in general. And the additional challenge for that then they are even in exile. And also the cleavage that now which emerging between those who are in exile and those who are still relying on Russia. So the picture is really, really bad. So what I tried to in this my short speech was to pinpoint that it's, well, I don't have maybe the answers, and it's quite difficult to imagine how it would change, because I think, judging from Russia's history, to change most likely start in the top, and that is then added by or some sort of civic processes are part of that process, but it's of course a completely open question. If the current situation lasts 20 years, 30 years, then it's of course there is what I try to be optimistic is still that, well, the Soviet Union was relatively isolated and lasted for 70 years, and still it didn't produce much of that kind of, when the opportunity emerged, people were ready to at least to try the new one. So there was not such an risk of, judging from the experience of the Soviet Union, that it was the society was completely lost, because now those views have been expressed as kind of a new anti-Russian, anti-Western type of coalition might emerge when everything's connections are cut. But I don't believe that. I think that this lack of coordination I mentioned, it's not completely beneficial for the regime as well. So I think this is the hopes are relatively, maybe they are laying in the level of what this book was about, that in general modernization on the level of these antinomies. But on the concrete empirical basis, there's much to say.
Thank you, Jussi. And at this point, I'd like to thank you, to Saara, Meri, Elena, Marina, Tuomas has already left, and Markku, and finally, I'm going to give the floor to Markku Kivinen, who will have the closing remarks. So thank you.
Okay, so dear colleagues, I most of all want to thank all of my partners in this process. We had almost 50 people, many of them senior, but also junior people making their first steps in their careers in the context of the Center of Excellence. And now I think this is the end of one period, but I hope really that this idea that we don't start from the 0 point again. So that's why I'm emphasizing that. Read the book and discuss the book. That's the most important thing. But the antinomies are meant to be applied in the analysis. What we intended to say is that we didn't challenge the previous paradigms in those terms that we were saying that they are nonsense. There's lots of this kind of rhetorics in social sciences that you show, in first step you show that why you choose your theoretical approach. Most of the theoretical approaches are in some sense relevant. We have to learn to discuss across the previous paradigms in those terms that we see how they might be also complementary. For example, the jump from totalitarianism paradigm to transition paradigm was a complete change, as if the world has changed completely, with completely new kinds of concepts. And still the totalitarian paradigm is relevant today to some extent, and that's quite evident. And these kind of complementarities have to be understood. But they can only be understood if we learn about those who think in different terms, in different paradigms, but also in different terms in different disciplines. But then, only if we can discuss across the paradigms, across the disciplines, then we are strong. We're much stronger than when we only focus on our own disciplines and on our previous paradigms. And this is the promise that we have. Maybe we are learning something which is significant not only for Russian studies, but for social sciences and the role of social sciences in general. And this is ambitious enough. I think we have to be this ambitious. That's my message. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.